After all, while this plague enforces a temporary distance from other humans, there is no reason not to lean in close to other beings, gazing and learning, for instance, the distinguishing patterns of the bark worn by each of the local tree species where you live. No reason not to step outside and pry open your ears, listening and learning by heart the characteristic songs and calls of the various local birds. No reason not to apprentice yourself to a spider as it weaves its intricate web in front of the porch light. Estranged from direct human contact for a brief while, with a chance to open a new intimacy with the wider world we're a part of, with coyote and owl and aspen. Soon enough, if it's not already happening where you are, spring will be exploding out of all those budded branches. And that is a goodness. If you live anywhere near a wetland, pay it an evening visit. See if you can join your voice to the gurgling chorus of frogs without shocking them all into silence. Sit down for tea with a lichen-encrusted boulder. Now, get over your shyness, wander over to the bank of the river that courses through your town and invite the gushing current to dance with you. If it accepts, you needn't plunge in, but rather gaze and listen and feel into the flux as you move. Let its wildness tumble downstream through your muscles, coaxing the river into rapport with your own sinuous moves and meanders, experimenting till you find the right rhythm, the right syncopation for the erotic rock and roll of its alluvial groove. Sure, it's mighty important to keep apprised of the human news, yet we can draw unexpected nourishment by walking away now and then from the screen-mediated sphere of our exclusively human concerns, rekindling our animal senses and rediscovering our solidarity with everything else. That was a piece by David Abram, In the Ground of Our Unknowing. Always love his absolutely poetic muse and philosophy and our connection with our ecologies, and what a brilliant way to frame a conversation between myself and another queer brother from abroad, Day, who is internationally known for his work using morning altars to inspire thousands around the world to renew their relationship to nature, creativity, and impermanence through ritual and the practice of earth art. Diving into some of the threads of our cultural imagination, keeping us somewhat at odds with our own wholeness, Day and I, in this conversation, explore themes of impermanence, queering masculinity, and non-binary ways of being in lived relationship with uncertainty and mystery. In this time, we are being exposed to the rigid patterns of being together and thinking. And so in this conversation, we dance with the wisdom of queerness, in illuminating what it might mean to navigate change and liminality with a little bit more openness and curiosity. How we have an addiction to having things stay the way they are and freezing in time. And in fact, by wanting things or trying to keep things as they are and freezing them in time, we strip them of their very vitality, of their liveliness. Life itself is change. And so we explore the significance of grief. We explore the significance of play and curiosity. And we dive into the, I suppose, queerness as not an orientation, but as a way of being, a non-binary way of being, and what that allows or affords us, not only in this time, but also beyond. And so this is a brilliant deep dive into some of the underlying imaginations that keep us at bay from ourselves, really, and how we might queer the way that we be together in the world, and what ritual and especially earth art might have to offer in bringing us into greater relationship with beauty and with impermanence. Enjoy. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, L. Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. All right, Dave, thanks so much for taking some time for a conversation.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it would be lovely just to begin by having you paint us a picture of where you are now, and also more broadly, where you sense we are now in this very unique time that we're in.
Well, I'll start first off just by speaking to where I am, because I think it's a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
It is the end of summer, and I'm in another country. I'm not even in my home country right now. I'm in Canada, British Columbia, and I came here in January of this year to work on a book. And then the game plan was April 1st to be on the road again. I've been on the road now for 2 years with my work. And so the game plan was to be in British Columbia, to be writing for about 3 months, and then to continue on the road. And then, the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been months later and I'm still here, which is, kind of a secret hidden gift for me, to be in one place for some time and to be working exclusively on birthing this book. And so, yeah, I live in a tiny house, beautiful handmade tiny house by the people that own it. And the Gulf, the sea is right there. She's just right over the road. And right down the block here, about 2-minute walk, is a First Nations reserve, the Tsaut First Nations people. And I'm on an island called, in the settlers' language, Salt Spring Island, but in the Tsaut Nations language, it's called Winanech. And it has been a pleasure, a challenge, a dedication to be in relationship to this place every day. Sometimes very easy, sometimes very difficult. I don't really know the language here, even though the common language is English. I don't know how to speak the Tsaut Nations language, except a few words. And so I'm doing my best every day to just, greet the ocean and greet the trees here. And, part of my calling in this world is to make art from nature. And so I do that as a daily practice. And so I'm offering beauty every day to the place here, which I think is pretty proper when it comes to being a hospitable guest, is to show up with some flowers or a bottle of wine. So my flowers and bottle of wine is my art. And I'm doing my best to just show up beautifully every day here. So that's where I am, a little brief kind of introduction into the place that I am. And in terms of where we are, I would say, I would really contend at first with that there's a we in the first place. I'm not sure that I believe that there's a common we. And so I don't know where we are. It's the honest response, because I don't know if there's a we. And just based off of so many people's sharing and feelings and crying and pleading and wondering, it sounds like everyone every day is all over the place, which is pretty proper when it comes to transitional times. Because, if there's a we facing anything right now, it's a we facing uncertainty. And we are all in completely different relationships with the mystery. Some people are in complete denial with it. Some people are surrendering. Some people are grieving. Some people are wondering. Some people are struggling. It's all over the place. And so the times that we're in are deeply informed by a returning to our relationship with uncertainty. And the big question that emerges from that return is, what is your lived relationship with it? Meaning, what's your everyday relationship with uncertainty? What's your everyday relationship with mystery? And it's, that's really where the rubber hits the road. You can really tell where people have an everyday lived relationship with the things that they don't know, with the unpredictable. And you can really tell where people are, every day are showing up unpracticed with it. And so as we go further into this descent, I think it's really going to showcase the cultural, and when I say cultural, I'm referring to the Western culture, the modern culture that I live in right now. It's really going to showcase the weakness when it comes to our capacity to be in relationship with uncertainty and to practice skills such as wonder and curiosity and surprise and all of the skill sets that really that are required of us in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the at first I was surprised when you said I don't think there is a we, and I was curious to dive in more, and I still am curious to dive in more. And I think it's a really important perspective to hold that, yeah, at this stage, for many of us, there is not an experience of we. I know for me and for those that I witness and feel around me, due to the uncertainty and maybe our unpracticed ways of being graceful amidst it, there is a kind of self-reclusion and it very much in self-protection mode, which shuts us down from any experience of we. Yeah.
I think,
and
Paul,
so
I think referring to, using the term we is an earned endeavor. It's something earned, and it's something lived, and it's something really it's something failed over, it's something cried over, it's something sung over. It's like it's actually something done. And I have I'd say some real remnants in my life and in my community around a we, but that we has been passed to us for thousands of years of my own tradition. And so, and we're like being given like the frayed edges of a we, because we've been in exile now for thousands of years. And so, a we is often connected to a place. It's often connected to it's often connected to a place or land. And so it's very hard when you're personally, when you're on the road, but when you're traveling and running and or you're a refugee or you're a migrant, to hold together that we. So, I'd say it's an earned thing. And it's funny that this is coming up now because just different communities online that I'm a part of, they're really wrestling people. It's like a very hot topic yesterday and today. So I'm surprised it's coming up, but it is around this word tribe. People are really questioning this. A lot of people are very undone by other people using the word tribe. Which is really a word that is a we, right? It's trying to say this is who we are. And there's other people that are saying that word feels really yucky. And it's just, people are wondering about it. And so it's interesting that you and I are talking about this today, because it seems to be kind of in the collective field.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, my book originally was called Modern Tribe, and I also came up against a lot of, I suppose, tension, and just received a lot of feedback from First Nations, Indigenous Australian peoples, for whom tribe is a sacred word. I mean, it is a Western word, but tribe, in its deepest sense, is that deep emotional and spiritual intimacy with one another and with country,
and physical intimacy, together, being together physically.
Yeah. And so when you go calling a Facebook group something or other tribe, then we are stripping it of its sacrament.
Well, since your podcast is about the in-between, I'm going to plant myself in between and say that I don't have a particular, I think the beauty of wonder is the willingness to sit in between something and to not put yourself in the black or the white, but to sit and wonder about the space between. And so specifically when it comes to using this word, it's very nuanced. It is an English word, first off. So like for anyone to, to use that word is it a sacred word? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily want to say that it is one thing or the other. I'm wondering about it as well. And I am troubled, as you said, about people that employ that word when it comes to like online communities or people that I've never met before. I think there's a way of watering down that word significantly, which is troublesome. And at the same time, you know, there is like we all come from that. Everyone's people came from a tribe. Everyone. So whether or not that's an immediate memory or that's a forgotten memory long in your ancestral line, it's still an ancestral reality for everyone on this planet. So, yeah.
Yeah. Holding both. Let's see where we where we can guide ourselves. Yeah. So I'm curious for you as to your journey. I mean, the intersection of art, nature, and education and beauty, finding our, as you said, ways of practicing the being in the mystery, in the unknowable, in the uncertain. Yeah, I'm curious just to hear a little bit about, I suppose, your journey of epiphanies or revelations that had these worlds converge for you.
Yeah, I would say I don't know if they've converged for me. I think they converge, and I happen to be maybe in the right place or the right time, or maybe I happen to be listening or to be claimed by it, or, to be somehow like a little bit splash on my face and I'm refreshed by it. I don't think it happened for me or it happened to me. I think on some way, like I'm really laboring over continuing to bring them together inside of me, And so I really see the things that you just named as alive. And I strive every day to make them alive again. And that requires a lot of putting down what I think I know so that I can really exist in a lot of curiosity and a lot of wonder and a lot of humility. And so just a little backstory, a lot of this adventure, years and years ago, I used to work on Broadway. I mean, I was a director. I was playing with, telling stories in the theater. And I, around that time, kind of like about 10 years into that experience, my father got really sick and died within 3 years. And I had a pretty significant relationship breakup. And so pretty much as I left the theater, I kind of stepped into a lot of grief in my life, specifically around losing the very things that I was relying on, people, really, relationships. And so I was called to just go. I had actually a dog at the time who was my dad's dog that I adopted. And partially in thanks to her, I had to take her out every morning for long dog walks. And that got me out of my house, which I don't think, because I was so immersed in my grief, I don't think I would have if I didn't have a dog. And so we went walking in the hills and I just was, dogs are just constantly curious beings, And I was really ruminating in my mind a lot on these dog walks, trying to figure things out, especially, how things got to be the way they are. And Rudy, this miniature schnauzer, would go and like bring me to like little things that would pop me out of my grief, like a feather or a cluster of elderberries or beautiful bark and one morning we were just walking in the hills and I came across these beautiful amber colored mushrooms under this tree on the convergence of 3 paths in the park. And I was compelled to just sit down under that tree, partially because I was just sad. And I started to arrange the mushrooms And then I mixed it up with bark and with eucalyptus caps. And in retrospect, what I was doing was using my hands to do what my mind was doing, which was to arrange things, to like temporarily put things in order, because things were so disordered in my world thanks to the loss. And about an hour went by, and by the end I had this beautiful symmetrically made piece of art out of natural materials that eventually just blew away again. But I felt like some of my grief had lifted a bit. And so I made a challenge to myself to go back to that same spot and to make new art every day by whatever I foraged along the dog walks. And so I did, and 30 days came and passed, and sorry about the light. And that's better.
It's great. You just look angelic.
And 30 days came and went, and I didn't want to stop. And so then I started to make art, nature art every day, and eventually it became a devotional practice. It wasn't just about kind of alleviating my grief. It was like a friend of mine would have a baby, or I would move, or the elections came, and I was, and it became, I would make art out of nature as a devotional practice, as a gift to give back. And so that practice basically took me. And I eventually wrote a book about it. And I've been doing this practice that I call morning altars for probably almost 9 years now. And I've made over 1,000 altars, more, if not more. I do it every day. And it's a way for me to, as I said, like weave together nature, art, and ritual into my life, and to encourage and empower other people to do that in their lives. And the beautiful thing about this practice is it's completely free. There's no money. You don't have to be a certain age. You don't have to be of a certain race or an income bracket or anything, really. You just have to leave your house and be willing to discover things right outside your door, and to just temporarily make something for a purpose, really, to like bring more meaning. So yeah. So anyway, all of the art I've ever made is gone. All of it is impermanent. And so all of it is very much sits at that edge between anything from permanence and impermanence to perfection, imperfection, to creation, destruction. And it's a very dynamic edge. And so I find this art and this practice to be very healing. And it's brought me now to write the second book that I'm working on right now, which is about ritual and advocating for more ritual and more ways to make meaning in people's lives, especially when they're going through change. So.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And it's, I just love so many things about it. And one is, of course, the way that it really is a lived practice of, the liminal, the space between, the fact that you're taking something that bringing order to a sense of chaos, which of course is just ordered in a different way, but bringing order to it, very well knowing that of course it's going to disintegrate and disseminate again. But for that moment of practice, it helps one really, I suppose, come to I wouldn't say humbled and graceful sense of order in their own being. Like it's a cohering practice by the sounds and feel.
And play. I mean, it's like creativity is also very much about trying things on, trying things out, not getting so stuck in how you want things to be, about your preference of things. The beautiful thing about my art is that it's, as much as I get it to be how I want it to be, it's like a collaboration and a dialogue with the greater world, so sometimes the wind will just come and like blow it away, or the rains come, or the sun sets, or an animal steals something, or, something dies on me. And so it really puts me right up against my preference of how I want things to be. you know, because I think sometimes, especially in the modern culture, we get so, and especially with this with technology, we get so caught up in wanting things to be a certain way, you know, and when it goes a little awry or a lot awry, as we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, our response to that is often like rage or shutdown or blame or shame or all of these things. And yet this whole experience is asking us to play with it on some level. I mean, there's reverence in that, and I can speak to that separately. It could be I could speak to this very seriously, but just to isolate the play for a second, you know, it's very much about play, and it's about trying things on. And so when it comes to my practice, like the people that really get it instantly are the kids. Because they're not like, kids will just like build a sandcastle and then they'll destroy it. You know, they don't care. We care so much, overly care. And it immediately blocks us from like trying, from anywhere from trying something out and taking a risk to actually like, you know, we become so, we like make everything so precious. You know, like everything has to be like so precious. And in doing that, we're constantly trying to like keep things the way they are. And therefore our relationship to change is really skewed, because when things change, which is really what life is doing all the time, our kind of amateur response to change is to like hunker down, hold on, fight it. But kids, most kids, like without the programming of their adults, like kids, as especially young kids, when change comes in a playful environment, a lot of the time they're just willing to roll with it. You know, I mean, there are times where you push back for sure. I remember like playing a board game with my brother growing up, and like it didn't go the way he wanted it to, and so then he just like flips the board, and then I would get very upset, you know. But then eventually you like move on, you know. You don't like get so caught up in like in it being a certain way. And I think as we get to become adults, that happens a lot. And this is a very easy way for me to translate our conversation, because I know that you heard me first on Ian's podcast on the mythic masculine, and I gave a talk to him that I think he entitled Queering the Pandemic. And, you know, this is a very easy translation into just talking about like the kind of the nuts and bolts of what queer means to me, which is you know, kind of existing in a very playful, creative, imaginative space that doesn't get shackled to things being a certain way, and understands life as a way of playing, collaborating, communicating, adjusting, trying. Like all these active words that are all about a dance, you know, it's a dance. The light is really like a player here in this conversation.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
apologize about it.
No, it just makes you look angelic. It's very, yeah, it's lovely. Let's keep it. Yeah, I really appreciated the conversation with Ian around queerness and expression and authenticity and masculinity. Also, as someone who identifies as queer, I find it really fascinating the to what extent is queerness an orientation, and to what extent is it just a way of being in the world?
I would say, like, I mean, with most things, my preference is to verb them. So, because I think when we noun something, it becomes very solid. And I think the verbing gives a lot of things their ability to be alive and to change. And so like, it's even like, to me, again, there's 10,000 opinions, but how I approach something like queer is more like queering. And so what does it mean to queer myself, or to queer something, rather than to be queer? Like, I'd rather not associate with an identity unless that identity is active and changing. And so and dynamic and alive. And so my relationship with queer is queering, which means that it's changing, it's alive, it's dynamic. And so and I think the real kind of pitfall, I'd say more so the stuckness around masculinity is that certain people have been told a story that says it is this. And that story has boxed itself in. And then men are looking to, or usually boys or teenagers are looking to emulate that story because it promises a certain kind of quality, like, like strength, or, like confidence or something like that. And so what happens is the perpetuation of this story, which is just frozen this idea of what masculinity is. The problem with that is that it's like a root, it's like a house plant where its roots are bound, and it's just trying to like break out of a pot and to go back into the earth in relationship with everything else around it, but it's stuck because it's frozen, it's like in its own stuckness. And so, and therefore, like queer people, the feminine, like everything seems very threatening to it because it's all so alive. And so masculinity, I think Ian, what he's attempting to do, and so many other teachers, especially in this movement, I'm thinking of Michael Mead, I'm thinking of Martin Shaw, I'm thinking of my teacher, Stephen Jenkinson, like what a lot of these men are trying to do is like break that pot by putting ourselves back in the earth into older stories and myths that tell a story that has been forgotten, where masculinity is not what we think it is. It's much more dynamic. It's much more alive. It's much more in service to the living world. And I think queerness is one of the gifts of helping to break the pot.
Yeah, I love the metaphor of the pot. I really feel it for myself. I mean, in conversations as a teenager, well, first and foremost, I didn't know who I was, of course, in the first place, and felt so unsafe even exploring it. But then coming out, of course, there's the statements of, oh, it's okay, you'll figure it out soon. It's like, no, actually, I've figured it out and I'm choosing not to identify.
Right.
That's my figuring it out, choosing not to box myself into a pot. But it's just so hard to communicate that when the cultural imagination, or just the imagination of the dominant culture, is such that we require a pot.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't work if it's not in a pot. If it's not forever growing and spreading its roots, it's seen as dangerous or not mature yet. Like, you'll build a pot one day. You'll get there.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And you're like, and how I see that is like, yeah, maybe I will, but then maybe I'll break the pot. It's like, sure, I'll try on being a houseplant for a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone else can look after me for a while.
Huh?
Yeah. Someone else can look after me for a while.
Yeah, why not? But like, I think the point is that it's to really contend with when I say our, I mean the Western culture, the dominant culture of the West, addictive relationship with permanence. I know a thing or two about impermanence. I do. I have a daily relationship with it. And so I have a way of seeing that's relatively unique. And so I do see an addictive relationship to things lasting, things staying, things being frozen. Growing up, I came from, I was an Orthodox Jew for about 10 years of my adolescence. And I'm still, I have a very interesting dance with my tradition, but I don't adhere to that orthodoxy. But some people that I know do. And there are some people that we call ultra Orthodox, where literally they froze a certain time let's say like Poland aristocracy in the 1700s, they literally froze that time, and all of their dress and customs and ritual is all frozen from that time period. And that's a trauma response. That's trauma, which is saying we're scared that this is going to change. So we have to freeze. We have to freeze it. I mean, it's kind of what you do with your refrigerator and freezer. Like, I'm scared that my, like meat's going to go bad. So I'm going to freeze it so I can take it out at a later date. That's what they did with a lot of traditions do this. They're scared that they're going to lose it. So they freeze it. Masculinity is no different than frozen meat in that sense. It is a frozen understanding of something that has been scared to be lost, that it was going to be lost. And so we freeze it. We're trying to make it permanent so that we don't have to worry that it will be lost. This is a very, very interesting thing to consider, our relationship to permanence, in relationship to sexuality and gender especially. And so the only way to get out of this, to continue the language, the only way to thaw this is to continue to keep it alive. It's the only way to not resort to this understanding of permanence. And therefore, how do you keep something impermanent alive? That's the question.
Yeah.
If it's going to be impermanent, how do you keep it alive?
Because in a sense, by freezing it in time, we're actually deadening it. It's no longer alive by trying to keep it as it is in this very moment. We strip it of its liveliness, of
and
its
you strip
beauty,
it of
its
and liveliness means you strip it of its capacity to change.
Yeah, and there's the what's it called? I think it's an anti-futurist manifesto written by the Indigenous Action Network here in Australia, and it's all about the kind of apocalyptic narrative to say that it's the end of something. And in many Indigenous cultures, there is no end. There's just a transition. There's just a change. There'll just be a new something. And so instead of being so caught up on the end of things as we know them to be, can we shift the narrative to be curious about what's emerging and what are we transitioning into and through and to become?
I again would rather sit in my work and in my teachings. I choose to sit in the in between rather than, because I think that can easily go into more of a bypassing experience, especially in our culture. As I said, the Western culture that is, as my teacher says, grief phobic and grief illiterate and death phobic. And so there's a great turning away from endings, and always wanting to like kind of talk about like, okay, well that's ending, but what's starting? And so I think there is a place, there's an important place to sit at something ending. Absolutely. Hands down, stop. And yes, there's also an important way to recognize that like things are changing. And so like in relationship with my art, for instance, there is a moment where this thing that I created starts to deconstruct. And there's heartbreak around that. And there's, and there's a reckoning that happens around that. And the pieces are not over. They're just over in the form that I made them in, And so, yeah, there's a continuation of them kind of returning back to the earth for sure. And that's the continuation of life. I was recently listening to an Indigenous woman I think her name's Rowan White. I will double check. But she is a seed keeper. She does seed rematuration. And I was listening to a talk of hers. And what really stuck with me is she said, how do you keep seeds? She asked that question. How do you keep seeds? Because a lot of people want to put them in jars or in little little packets. And then you have the whole problem of like certain companies saying like, these are our seeds. We own these, And she said the best way to save seeds is to put them in the ground. And that's the same thing I'm talking about, which is how do you keep something from being stuck and permanent? You put it in the ground. You let it change. You take care of it. And you pass on the ways to take care of that thing to the next generation. Right? So that's how you keep something alive. And by the way, this book I'm writing about ritual is no different. That's how you keep ritual alive. That's how you keep people alive. That's how you keep gender alive, or whatever we're talking about. You put it, you give it over. You put it in the ground, you let it change, you let it grow and die. And then you collect the new seeds and you do the same process again, plant it again.
Yeah. I love that. Put it in the ground. Yeah. Just giving yourself over to the great humbling tidal forces. Yeah. I'm curious to hear a little, if you're open to sharing about your process of queering. From maybe, was there a stage when you felt, you were living in the pod, and just to hear a couple of notes about your queering process.
Sure. I mean, it's still ongoing, I mean, this morning, if you were a fly on the wall in my little tiny house, there was a full on like Broadway musical number that entailed me doing a little strip show here just because I was into some song. I'd say I think I would consider it to be like my relationship with my muses, which is very ephemeral. So you were asking me before this podcast started about my relationship with writing. You wanted to know that? And I'll just say, like, some days she's here and some days she's not. And I know when she's here, and I also very much know when she's not. And I feel like my queerness has that quality to it, where some days I'm in that flow and flexibility, and I can feel my roots reaching into something that's very creative and imaginative as an identity, as a personality. You know what I mean? Some days like this morning, today it's very like, I really feel the flexibility of being the many colors of myself. And some days it's fucking black and white. And that's okay. Like that's part of the rainbow too. Right? Like we're not excluding, we're including into the wholeness of everything. So some days that's black and white. I think the thing that is the practice is learning not to resist that. Like when I'm in those days where things feel very like that queering spirit is not here, and it feels a lot more serious, and it feels a lot less playful, and it feels a lot more black and white, this and that, to just let that be here too. In some ways I see it really, like if I could elevate my thinking right now, I would just call it hospitality. And I'm just being a host to many different visiting spirits. And the best way of being hospitable is being welcoming, and this is not at all anything that I've learned. I didn't have any mentorship as a child with this. The kind of, look, I'm writing I've written a chapter in this new book. As I said, this book is about 40 different life transitions, anywhere from losing a pet to coming out of the closet to death anniversary to divorce to it's all lots of life transitions. And so the chapter I wrote about on coming out of the closet, like rituals for coming out, both that you can do as a person coming out of the closet, and also that your family or friends can do to support you and to mark those moments. I did quite a lot of consideration about my own childhood and the lack of ritual that surrounded my coming out, and the lack of ritual and marking that the culture was capable of. And also, more importantly, like the real lack of queerness or gayness or lesbianness as I was coming out. We had no one in my family that was gay, except one cousin that was very closeted. No, barely, I mean, no one on television, no one in the movies. It was not something that I was getting reflection on, right? And so the journey was a very lonesome journey. And it wasn't until I was living in Israel at the time, my junior year of college, and the year started off with me almost dying in a bus bombing where I was about, 100 yards from the bomb, getting thrown out of my bed. And the year ended with me coming out of the closet. And the only reason I was able to do that was because a friend of mine came out a few months before, and so modeled for me a way through. And so my relations, and at the time, as I said, I was religious. And so I kind of put down that religious way of relating to life, and I kind of picked up more of a embodied queer way of relating to life. And it's been a journey. And a lot of my journey through my queerness has been like coming into some kind of equilibrium around sexuality and my relationship with sex specifically, because it was so suppressed for so much of my adolescent life, when that aspect of someone wants to flower, that was something that I needed to very much keep inside of a box. And so when you suppress something, it kind of has like a jack in the box, action to it, where like the more you push it down, the more it wants to bounce out. And so the bounce back has been like the last fucking 20 years of my life, contending with that and trying to bring that into more of an equilibrium, and to invite that Eros energy into this greater relationship with life, which is, it's not a relationship that's only about trying to acquire something, get somewhere, figure it out, get someone. I think those ways of relating to life are deeply woven into the colonial mindset, which is about acquiring, and also about permanizing, which I don't even think is a word, but I just made it up.
There we go.
So, it's like those understandings of how I would even relate to my sexuality has been like trying to get something or someone, and rather than relating. And so as I've become more practiced in relating, I have been working through that wound and trauma, and inviting those aspects of myself into more of a lived and dynamic experience. And so there's been a lot of healing in that. But the struggle is real, my friend, because I think the dominant culture is still deeply wounded, of course. And also the LGBTQ community is deeply traumatized, and or whatever community means in that way, those of us that kind of collect ourselves under that umbrella. And so, I think the way through is to think, generationally, and to continue to model my life in a way that's in service to generations to come, and to put down the gripe that I never got what I needed when I was a little gay boy, and instead be in service to those that are, 3, 5, 7 generations from now, if we survive this climate catastrophe. So, so I see my life as a seed, really. And the best way to do it is put it in the ground.
Put it in the ground. Yeah, that's definitely going to continue ringing for me as well, as it sounds like it is for you, that metaphor. Yeah, and thank you for sharing. I resonate, of course, on many levels as well. And really honor and love the articulation in returning to relationship through a lens of queerness and taking it beyond what I think it's Alan Downs calls the velvet rage.
Right. I have that book.
Queer. Yeah. Which, yeah, I mean, I definitely feel in myself as well. And there's moments where there's this kind of revengeful self that comes out in me that the tendency could be to overcorrect, to become overly flamboyant, to put on a show, to become performative in a sense, to kind of make a point.
Right.
And at moments where I notice myself do that and I start flinging my arms about or doing whatever, I notice myself then push away others who maybe do identify as cis men and don't have a relationship with queerness. It's very othering. And for me, to then think about 7 generations from now, how can we, whilst we still have this kind of velvet rage inside of us, how can we model what queering could look like without it being something that pushes others away? And I'm curious if there's any specific things or things that you've noticed for yourself when maybe you are in spaces where there are other men. How is it that you, I suppose, gently invite or model queering or queerness in a way that's still sensitive to...
When you say when there's other men, are you saying queer men or just men in general, or
just men in general?
Oh, yeah. You know, it's funny. The last week, it's funny that you asked that, because the last week I've been around a variety of cis straight men who have really pissed me off because there's, I mean, a variety of ways. Like one example is I was at a dinner a few nights ago and it was 4 families and myself, and I'm here single, and they are 4 straight guys and 4 straight women. If they're listening, call me, we'll talk. But if you're not, and this is for your audience, I don't know how the conversation at the dinner table got this way, but it eventually turned to LGBTQ rights and how many rights have been acquired over the last few decades. And it was amazing. For about half an hour, especially one guy, the straight guys were just talking about it. And I was just sitting there, you know, like that. And I could feel like some of the women were looking at me, but those guys were like fucking oblivious. And there were no questions being asked towards me. There was no consideration. It was really weird. And then after the dinner, I got a text from my host who was like, how did that land on you? Like, you know, like that was really weird for me. So I'm curious how it was for you, you know? And I think a lot of the time, I think part of it is actually like coming into the awareness of like, oh yeah, like I'm in that a lot, you know, like I think over the years, I've just gotten used to it. But I think part of it is to like, part of the queering is like the questioning. You see what I mean? Like, is to actually like look behind the curtain and be like, this is something, you know, rather than like reacting or defending. Like one of the ways that I've come to queer is to question. And that leads me into a lot of wonder, you know, and to just like really come to like, how is this the way it is? Like, how is it that we're sitting at a table and these straight men are parading around with their queer flags saying, look how progressive we are, but they're not even like asking the queer guy at the table anything about this, you know? So I think like one of my ways is queering it. I think the second, and I haven't really thought about it much, but like the second way that I practice it is by playing with my own reaction. So I think I think a lot of people get very stuck in their rage or their anger or their grief or their sorrow about how things are, and properly so. But I think you can get stuck in that rut. And I think a lot of my practice is to play with seeing it through a spectrum and to see like, oh, but if I look at it through this angle, I see that. And if I look at it through that angle, I see that. And to be more playful with my way of seeing. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not just seeing it straight.
Yeah.
And I think forgiveness is there too. I think queering contains a lot of forgiveness, a lot of compassion, a lot of a willingness to compost, to return the scraps back to the earth. And therefore, the fourth element of queering in my purview is a willingness to understand that we're in a much bigger story that is alive. And once we can compost that, and you can witness, I mean, I don't know your relationship with actual compost, but you know, it's stinky and it's alive and it's messy and it's beautiful and it creates fertile soil. So, you know, yeah, I'd say like those are my four ways of, at least right now, you know, if you talk to me in an hour, maybe I'll have something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love I mean, it's also, for me at least, it just seems so obvious that, of course, to be in a queer manner, to queer as a verb, is to see through a kaleidoscope, is to, the question for me of what would non-binary ways of being look like in leadership, in politics, in like, what if, again, non-binary was a way of being, not a way of identifying, but a way of being. What would it?
But even being, like, again, you know, that word, at least in the research I've done and the stories I've heard, that word doesn't exist in a lot, if not most, indigenous languages. You can't literally say I am or to be. Everything, it's more actionable than, you know, so I'd say like rather than be, like, it's not, because I think you rest in the being thing, but I think everything is more a practice or an action or like a way of doing it, you know? And so I think that like, again, queering to me is like, I want to see it as actionable rather than an identity. Yeah.
Yeah. So many more threads I could dive into, but as a way of, I suppose, closing and bringing this to something that is actionable. And I mean, we've talked about many little snippets of things that people could take away as ways of seeing and ways of engaging at, say, a dinner table. But I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share just a little bit about morning altars as a practice and like an invitation for those listening in maybe to engage in their own practice.
Sure.
Some of the little points of intention in the practice as well. So the ritual doesn't remain, but the reason subsides.
Yeah, the morning altars, in doing it, I've come to understand it as a 7-step practice. And the steps are to wander and wonder, to kind of wander around your neighborhood and to see the place as if you've never seen it before. And then eventually to sit in a place and to wonder with the place. And then the 7 steps are the creation of something that can be symmetrical, could be asymmetrical, could be, you know, like a fairy house. It could be anything out of the material that you've gathered from the place itself. And then, as I said, to dedicate it to something meaningful, to mark some moment, and then to let it go. And yeah, I'd say to your audience, you know, I happen to have written a very beautiful book about it that has about, you know, both, you can look through the book and just see the beautiful pieces that I've made or the stories that I'm telling about those experiences. Or, you know, the other way I really like to write is also with a golden thread of wisdom. And because the practice is very simple, You're really, if I had to boil it down, you're just taking a bag and collecting some whatever you find interesting outside your front door, and you're just sitting down and making something and then like letting it go away. It's a very simple, 4-year-olds do this very well. And there's so many deeper threads in it, And so each chapter of this book addresses both the cultural poverties that we're in. For instance, here's a great one. It's kind of like what we're speaking about today a little bit. In the book, I coin a phrase called destination addiction. And what that means is we kind of all have this GPS mindset where we're in point A, we want to get to point B, and we're trying to get there as efficiently as possible. So when I do this, I teach workshops all around the world. And when I ask, number one, hey, spend the next hour and go wander. Go wander and get lost. Most people really struggle to do that because they're so used to getting to a certain destination. Not just physically. Sometimes in conversations, we do that too. For instance, maybe you've heard of the phrase, hey, can you get to the point? Like, if you were hosting our conversation today and asking me to constantly get to the point, that's destination addiction, right? Yeah. But what you're doing and what I'm doing is we're wandering together in a conversation, right? Really good conversations, maybe with your best friends, like they wander. Right? They go like this, almost like a river, right? They just weave back and forth into topics and then they meander. And so this very simple first step of the practice, which is just encouraging people to go outside and to see with childlike eyes, to snap out of this spell of familiarity and to see the world again as if you've never seen it before. And to do that, you have to stop the destination addiction. You just got to let yourself get immersed in a leaf or with an ant or in the ripples of a bark on a tree. And by doing that, you get taken. You get taken from your here to here. I don't know if your audience is listening to this, but from your head to your heart. And so, this practice is very much a practice of planting people in relationships, relationship to the place, relationship to the wind, to the sun, to the material like the flowers and the pine cones and the leaves, and a relationship to their own sense of, clinging to permanence and their relationship to letting something go. And so, if your audience, your listeners really want to check it out, they can go to morningaltars.com, morningaltars.com. Or if you just want to see the beauty, you just want to get a little hit of the altars that I make. I have a pretty beautiful, Technicolor feed on Instagram that people can dive into.
Yeah.
But really what I'm in about, I love my art, and what really jazzes me is when other people around the world send me what they've done. And so every day I get, people in all across the world sending me like little arrangements built out of acorns and, flowers and this and that for, someone lost their mother, or someone is feeling grateful, or someone had a baby, or, and that really just is like to see your inspiration ripple out into the world and then to get it back is very, very beautiful. And I'm very grateful. So if anyone's inspired listening to this to try it out, you don't really need me. Go out and do it. But if you'd like a little bit of guidance, you can get my book or you can check out my website.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's such a beautiful, the first time I came across it as well through Ian, it just feels like such a beautiful constellation and coalescence of many practices that I adore and admire, like sit spot practices, mindful walking, many Buddhist practices, and art, beauty, play, just all come together into such a seemingly simple, but with intention, incredibly profound
Yeah,
offering.
and like, right, I mean, I think the most trustworthy wisdom come from sometimes the simplest experiences.
Mm.
It's not
Yeah.
a very complex. Real wisdom is often found like when washing your dishes.
Mm.
Like some real hard-earned stuff there. So some of these things might at face value appear very simple, and I think that's what ignites the playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have, you can really just play, and that's great. But there's always these deep lessons, and they take people by surprise. And oftentimes there's a lot of tears and a lot of realizations because they think it's simple.
Mm.
And I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. 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 And in the thinking it's simple, the lightness of spirit allows one to offer themselves to it in a way. And
Yeah,
it
you're just playing with
courts
flowers.
yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure we put those links in the show notes. Is there anything else you would like to offer or share or ask as we close to give it a sense of resolution and wholeness to our conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I for some reason the thing that's come to mind right now is, you know, how important it is for us to kind of grow and cultivate our relationships with the natural world, especially during this time when so many of us are isolated and lonesome and scared and looking for answers and etc. And I'll just share like one way that I'm doing it in my life, which is I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and he was saying that he wants to write his dissertation on darkness and write the dissertation basically about how darkness is in full retreat these days, with technology and screens and lights on at night. And hearing him, I was like, fuck yeah, like I actually am totally guilty of this. Like, I don't have a really real relationship with darkness. And I think also kind of in the wellness community, like everyone talks about like light and love and light and enlightenment. And there's a real draw towards the light and a real demonization of the dark. And anyway, so I heard him and I heard myself claim guilty. And so what I've been doing every day is, before bed, I wash my dishes and brush my teeth and do my little self-care and close the blinds in my little tiny house here. And then I've been walking to the shore at night. And I've just been sitting at the beach here and just watching the moon rise on the water and really being privileged to see kind of the moonlight dance on the water surface. And did our feed freeze? No, we're here.
Yeah, we're here.
And just be quiet and listen. And that's been a real highlight of my days lately, is to just go out and do that every day and every night. And so what I'll leave the audience with today is like, choose one thing, even better if it's not human. Like a tree or a plant or a leaf or a rock or a place, or whatever, just one thing, and just practice relating to it. And all the qualities of what it means to be in a relationship come up, like consistency, approach, kindness, listening, like all of these good relational skills come forward. And I'm doing that with darkness right now, just listening, and growing a better relationship with it and being informed by it and not being scared of it. And I'm realizing like I'm new in this relationship, and so I'm trying to practice it every night just for a few minutes. And so I wonder what your audience would choose.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just mulling in and loving the Yeah, not just inspiration. It's a real, for me, any practice that is connected with the intimacy and the vulnerability of nature itself is just deeply humbling and softening, and at the same time, so bloody powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a power that isn't from me, from one. It's through one, and feels incredibly life-giving and nourishing at the same time. And so, yeah, I'm just really enjoying the afterglow of the reminders of the importance of intimacy with nature and our ecologies. And yeah, I love the link between queerness or queering and letting the roots break through the pot. Fuck the pot. It's useful at times, but yeah. So thank you, Dave, for sharing, for taking time again, and for being in this inquiry and offering, the insight and inspiration that you do along the way.
Thanks for inviting me.
Lovely. What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey, and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.